Good morning, everyone. Through the magic of this virtual world that we are becoming so used to, I'm able to be both asleep in my bed and at the same time speaking to you at this event on the future of fisheries in a climate change world. My name is Manuel Barange. I'm the director of the Fisheries and Aquaculture division at FAO in Rome, from where I'm speaking to you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I have to say that when I looked at the list of attendees, my first reaction was, what am I going to tell these brilliant scientists, many colleagues and co-authors, that they do not already know? But at this point, I had already committed to providing a so-called keynote, so my options were limited. But what I said to the organizers is that I would try to be a little bit provocative instead of delivering a traditional keynote lecture. And I plan to do this without slides or graphs, getting us quantitative scientists out of our comfort zones. So let me start with a straight message. Someone once said that the problem with scientists is that they think that if the world knew what they know, they will think like they do. In other words, that what is limiting action is lack of knowledge and lack of understanding on the part of those making decisions. This is not true in my experience working with countries here in FAO. The problem is that decisions that affect people, that affect jobs, the economy, food, politics are complex. They involve trade-offs, and that may be different in different places and different situations. Actions is risky and is considered carefully. Often inaction is the result of the complexity facing the decision maker, not so much the lack of knowledge itself. Now, the way as scientists have been dealing with this has been, in many cases, trying to make the message as clear and as simple as possible, almost Twitter-style headlines. Messages that bypass uncertainties and unknowns as noises unimportant compared to the signal. And the longer the signal is not heard, the stronger that message becomes, and it is obvious that this becomes a negative feedback loop leading to more inaction. So how do we break this? First, I will almost contradict myself and make a passionate call for more science, because while lack of knowledge is not what limits action, it is very difficult to take the right actions if the knowledge is incomplete or inaccurate. The science must also be honest. One issue on this that I'm not particularly comfortable in the science that we do, the science of the impacts of climate change on fisheries, is that we seem to artificially reduce uncertainties along the path. Let me explain. If a temperature change with some uncertainty leads to a circulation change with additional uncertainty, itself leading to a primary production change with some uncertainties and assumptions, then leading on the basis of a fairly static assumptions to a change in productivity of a fish species. Uncertainty obviously multiplies in moving from A to Z, but we often communicate as if we were more certain of the magnitude of the productivity change, of the fish productivity change, than the temperature change we estimated at the start. What were Stephen Hawking's words? The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. So we have made enormous advances in the science of climate change and in estimating the impacts of it, and we ought to continue along this path. But action cannot be contingent to this knowledge, because it will never be sufficiently accurate or accepted fully to lead to an agreed action. I'm almost thinking that action must be influenced by science, but as much as possible, not contingent to its specific accuracy in its estimations. So let's go down to basics in trying to facilitate that process of action. When it comes to fisheries, there are three high-order impacts of climate change that you all know: distributional changes, productivity changes, phenological changes. These three changes are not going in the same direction for every fish in the ocean. You all know that. The first message that politicians and policymakers ought to hear is that the impacts of climate change in fisheries are not a zero-sum game. This is not about minimizing damages or maintaining status quo. It is also about maximizing opportunities. Other than mitigation, we cannot do much to convince a species not to change its distribution, but we can do a lot in terms of maximizing our response to this. And I think that sort of language, this language of maximizing opportunity, tends to turn on politicians and policymakers much more than the negativity that we often communicate. Now, I do not know why particularly, but when it comes to ocean issues, so many intelligent people conclude that protection is the solution to everything. So the second message I would tell policymakers is that protection is a lazy fallback position to take. Effective, dynamic, and ambitious management action is what is needed. Not okay, let's get everyone out of the water. That is lazy and ineffective and will unlikely be successful. And this science of adaptation, this science of identifying opportunities is what we are not investing in. The multidisciplinary science that does the following. Okay, right, species A is moving. We don't know how far and how fast, but we know that it is moving. In doing so, it will change some of its basic population parameters, its natural mortality, its growth, perhaps its reproduction, may even spawn earlier. So how do we adjust our survey program to follow the resource? How do we adjust our assessment model to incorporate these new parameters? How to consider the implications for current quota holders that depend on the resource? How do we assess whether the changes will challenge our jurisdictional responsibilities? After all, as you probably know, it's been estimated that a 2-degree warming in atmospheric temperature will lead to over 50 exclusive economic zones around the world having new transboundary stocks. How do we work with our neighbors to set up institutions and agreements to cope with these changes? How do we analyze the long-term impacts for our dependent communities? And how do we explore consumer awareness and education, which is also part of the science of fisheries as food? The science of adaptation. Now, as many as you know, FAO tried to sell in the famous Climate Change in Fisheries and Aquaculture report that many of you contributed back in 2018, a particular vision, a toolbox we called it. We said that adaptation had 3 entry points: institutional adaptations, livelihood adaptations, risk management adaptations. For each one of these entry points, we provided a bunch of examples of action. Adaptation is placed and context-based. It should be viewed as an ongoing and iterative process. It has a very basic understanding, and that is that we adapt to the possible rather than the probable, because our predictive capability is limited. But it has great possibilities. Do you remember the paper of Stephen Gaines in 2018? He showed that productivity and distributional adaptations can lead to increases in fishing harvest of up to 25% at the global level. So this is important. It's the science of adaptation. It is complex. It certainly is not at all easy. And it requires a multidisciplinarity that we are not yet completely used to. Now, to finish, I don't think the penny has dropped for many yet. More complex, more computer-intensive models with additional parameters and input information are great. They are beautiful, they are exciting, and I encourage you to continue, but they are woefully insufficient to help us adapt. In fact, in some ways, they can be seen as a hindrance because they are stopping us, the lack of development in those models are stopping us developing proper adaptation science. I'll leave you with a final message. We are moving to an age where we will no longer manage for stability. Managing for stability has been the basic principle in fisheries management for many, many years. But we will be now managing for change. A corollary to this, there has never been a stronger encouragement or more encouragement for serious sustainability management than climate change. Basic management, adapting management to what happens in the oceans in a very responsive manner. That is what climate change adaptation calls for. Now, I'm not sure this is helpful or relevant or just a rambling speech. I apologize if the latter, but it is what comes to mind as I look at the program of this interesting workshop and what I could do to influence the conversations of so many of you that I have so profound and respect, and that I know that you have better knowledge and better answers to many of the technical questions. But this bigger picture perhaps is something that I can provide. So thank you again for your time, and I wish you the best of luck for today's event, and I look forward to hearing about the conclusions that you reach. And with that, over to you, Chair. Thank you.